America or in the world. Periodically we will plant something in memory of something. So some of these trees, other than the trees around the perimeter, are in memory of that tree there, which has beautiful double flowers in the spring, is planted in memory of one of my uncles. And we have a couple trees over here that are planted in memory of a couple young people that have passed. What we try to do is we plant some hostas hither and yon in areas where we can't get at them with a mower, because the hostas really wipe out those weeds. And so it works out really well and enhances the appearance of the cemetery. One of the gene markers, lots of gene connections, many children, and if you've been looking at the charts you can understand that. The Tizerin family, some of the stones face the wrong way because the graves, the person going in the grave is supposed to be looking east. And so you turn the casket accordingly and the marker goes up accordingly, because if you're looking east then you can see the coming of the second coming. And I think that's the rule on that. But so some of the markers are backwards compared to others. My great-grandparents are here, Delfin Francis and August Remy. My grandfather bought that monument from the monument dealer, and it has a crack in it. So he got a good bargain deal on it because the guy didn't think it was going to last. Well, I think the last burial was 1912, and it's been here ever since. A couple of our relatives, one of Marianne, wherever you are, your little brother, is buried there. And the ashes of my Uncle Emmett is buried there as well. These grave plots were sold in 8 grave increments. And the going rate, I think, at that time was $90. And then everybody was supposed to pay $4 a year for upkeep. I have a book that shows who paid and who didn't, and that's always interesting. And also then when the priest needed something, there'd be another column for furniture for the priest in French. And then all the names would be written again, and who gave $2 and who gave $1 and who gave $5 and whatever. So we have nice attention to the newer graves with flowers, even the older ones. Let's merge over this way. With the cross, who do I have here from the Piernuts? Anybody? Yeah. Well, okay. I'm not sure who built that cross. I thought possibly the Piernut family. So anyway, it was donated by one of the French families and apparently put up in 1890. I have no record of it at all. So but it needs paint, so if anyone wants to donate. In fact, we're always willing to have a little cemetery donation upkeep. We have an account, and our CDs aren't worth diddle, so whatever you want to kick in. Let's move over this way, I think. That's Mosquito Haven up there, I believe. We have a grave up here. Hugo Henry's grave. Fred Henry's son, who developed the turkey farm in Basco, and his grave is up here as well as his sister's grave. So that's where Hugo resides, and that farm is still operating with pheasants and turkeys under the Wolf name management, and they're doing a thriving business on pheasants actually. Gus Lambert is buried here. His father is over yonder, Francis Joseph, I think. Gus was married twice, had umpteen kids. Does somebody know how many? Probably 12. And they are scattered around. Some of them became attorneys, one in Monroe and so forth. So the Lambert family that is still here in the area is a part of that family. The Kellys are related to the Lamberley family. And the Leclercs, it's an interesting story on the Leclercs. Why don't we just kind of merge over here. Picking this up. Okay, Paul Leclerc was the son of Francis Leclerc and his wife Selina, who are buried down there with two very rusty little crosses. Anyway, Paul and his wife had 3 sons, 2 of whom were twins, Clement and Clarence. And if you look at that, they were born in 1892, these 2 twins. And in the spring of 1920, I don't know which one died first, but one died, and what, 5 or 6 days afterwards, the other twin died. Both of influenza, but still, 20-year-old or 18-year-old twins, and 28-year-old twins, excuse me. And they died within just days of each other. So a real tragedy, and survived by their older brother and their mother. I think their father had already passed. So that's one of those little sad stories about who's buried here. We have a new addition to the cemetery. See this row of Chinese elms? That was where the fence was. So the cemetery was confined to this area. We ripped out the fence in 1974. Bob and Sally Stussy gave us an additional acre to the cemetery. So what we did is we developed half of it, which goes a bit beyond those flowering crabs, and had it surveyed and plotted. And so we have sold all but about 30 graves in that section. And part of the deal on buying or acquiring this acre was that it had to be down to, I think, 10% of the graves. Bill, you probably know the rules on that better than I. Anyway, with permission from Sally and the brothers, we opened up the other half, which opens up like 300 additional graves. So we do have graves for sale, folks, and our graves are $350 per grave. We don't sell them in plots or lots of, as some cemeteries still do. Because if you're going to be cremated, we allow 2 cremains to go into a single grave. And $350 is the real blue light special, I'll tell you. So if anybody's interested, then I'm the guy to talk to. And so we have one burial up in the new part, and I've got the other ones all kind of marked out with secret spots in the ground so I know where they are. But why don't we merge back this way? I don't know as though we have to go into the new part necessarily. That's where my parents are buried. My wife's parents are buried over there. Yvonne and I have 2 graves over there. But so you'll see on some of these stones those early names that were bantered around a couple of hours ago over at the town hall. August Mosier. They moved to, I think, Iowa. Some of the folks moved on west. In some cases, they moved back because they didn't care for it. The grasshoppers were eating their crops and a few other catastrophes. But the Garville family did that. Xavier Garville, who I call Xavier, but Mrs. Teal corrected me, and it should be Xavier, not Xavier. So they came back and then rebought their land here in Montrose. Down here is a grave I want to mention and a story behind it. This is the Henry, not this one, but this is the Henry stone, and this is the family that has the Henry seed corn operation up in Dane. So that family is still in the area, and Joe Henry, who owns that operation, owns 2 lots here on his grandparents' plot. And you maybe noticed we have flags in the flag holders for all of the veterans in the cemetery, and we have from Civil War on. I don't think we have any Mexican War, but First World War, Second World War, Vietnam, Korea, and you heard the story about the 3 guys that got conned into joining the Civil War when Madeline gave her dog and pony show a bit ago. The monument that's right here that this gentleman is leaning on, and you're loud because Uncle Delfin wouldn't care. That's Delfin Francis's stone. Then there's a story behind that. It's a stone only for him, but the two smaller stones adjacent belong to his children. And Delfin, in 1901, Delfin's sister, Josephine Remy, who we talked about momentarily ago, Josephine died from a nervous breakdown. Delfin and his wife were getting a divorce in 1901, and you can see how the Catholic Church would look at that. So this is very upsetting to the family. They were splitting. Delfin was drinking a lot, and anyway, he feels he was at fault with the death of his sister, Josephine. So the day of her burial, up on the hill next to her husband, he went to his home and committed suicide. Shot himself with a military rifle in the basement of his house. So normally someone who commits suicide would not be allowed to be buried in the blessed area of the cemetery. But there he is, there he was, and yet up on the hill, Grandpa DeBay, Ferdinand DeBay, he's in Potter's Field in that little corner right up there in the corner of the cemetery. And Grandpa DeBay hanged himself in one of the barns in the area. So it applied to Grandpa DeBay, but to Uncle Delfin, he was allowed to be buried there. And I think the reason, this is 1901, the reason I think he was allowed to be buried there is because the 2 marble stones adjacent to his marker contain, I think, 6 of his children, all of whom died. He and his wife had no children left. I think 3 or 4 of them died from diphtheria in 1900. One had died almost at birth. Another one died at age 2. But the ones that died from diphtheria were like teenagers, 13 and 12 and whatever. So all of their kids passed, and they're all buried right there. And so Delfin's buried right next to them. And that's probably the reason the church, gave its okay for his burial there. But they lived just up the road, and in the Belleville Recorder, it indicated that he and his wife were experiencing these children's deaths, and they quarantined the whole road just because it was diphtheria, and the whole road was quarantined. You couldn't go and visit or anything. So they had a lot of burials right there. Back behind the bridal wreath bush is where one of the Jenin brothers is buried, and his brother is buried over on the other side, and those gentlemen died from the Spanish influenza in 1918 and 1919. So here again, the illness went through the community, and some of these people were only like 40 years old. So it was a tragedy no matter how you looked at it. The story goes on and on. Olamp Jenin is down there with Madeline's story. That's where he's buried with the flag and the larger tombstone. August Francis was the other guy in the Civil War. He's buried here. Xavier Garville, buried a bit behind you. Those were the 3 mentioned. But there was a 4th Jenin brother who, after his brother got drafted, basically, he joined up too, and he stayed in the military after the Civil War was over, and served on on the Western Front with the Indian Wars, and he, I think, put in like 25 years of service in the military, and he never did get married. My grandpa remembers seeing him walking across the field, coming home from the military, and he was known as Uncle August because of the interconnection, the interconnection of the families. And so he stayed with his sister or sisters until he passed at age 55. So he didn't last too long. But he was in the military serving on the Western Front with possibly the Indian Wars. As you can tell, there's a story behind every one of these monuments, pretty much. But I think I'll wind it up and ask if you have any questions. I can maybe help you out.
Jerry, the gentleman that committed suicide?
Yeah.
Was that my grandpa and grandma? My grandpa and grandma?
Yes.
Yeah,
Jim and Cheryl.
Yeah, because I remember Mom always saying that.
It's probably a ghost. Maybe a ghost.
No, they did that to die.
So if there's any, I thank you for your attention.
At night to stay.
And if there's any more, yes, sir.
So this is pretty old, but it looks in good shape. Is that because it was harder marble, or?
This is granite.
Oh, granite.
Yeah.
Oh.
Around the turn of the century, the stones pretty much were sold as granite, and they're basically impervious. And one thing that they oftentimes didn't do, they didn't engrave as deep as they could have or should have. But so these all three big ones are granite.
Who's the mother?
Oh, the mother of.
She came over with.
It would be Marie Rose. There's just a stone for her.
Oh, okay.
Yeah.
What's the oldest?
I think the hollow metal one is probably the oldest.
That's the woman that fell off the wagon.
Yes, right. Yep. So, and I had some gentlemen come in and straighten stones, and they really gave me a poor job. So, I mean, you have Abel Eugene, one of the children over here, facing the wrong way. The guy came in and put new foundations on, but he did a crappy job. So, anything else I can help you with, folks?
Jerry, I just have a quick question to ask you. Sure. In some nationalities, like when there was another spouse, then the children went with that family. It sounds as if that wasn't what the French did.
No, I would say that the ones I know stories about, if the husband died and the wife had 3 kids, that became a part of the new family when she married, and they probably absorbed his kids at that time too, because he was probably a widower. Okay. And they were probably both young enough to have 3 or 4 more. So it became, I'm my own grandpa type of thing, you know.
Okay. Because what I found in the Ancestry I've been doing is that when the spouse died and there was a new marriage, then those children were sent to relatives or other people, so they were not a part of the new family.
Yeah, well, I think there's a case for Alphonse Vinny. Alphonse Vinny was run over by the train, and he's buried over there, and he left his wife with how many kids? Do you remember, Corinne? Alphonse Vinny's? Okay, I would say 8 or 10 children, some of whom were older, but they were parceled out to the aunts and uncles and so forth, because his wife then died very soon thereafter. And so those kids all had to go separate ways. One of those children, the descendants of one of those children, is really big into genealogy, so he has a record of who went where and why. Yeah.
Thank you.
Alphonse. I have some correspondence from him at home, Doug, and I just can't remember his name. Yeah. Sure. You want the land back, Sally?
No. I would like to know, you know, there's a lot of old photos on there, and if you look really close, the background is the same in a lot of them. Who was the photographer at that day?
Well, Colby was probably the more popular.
Where was that located?
He was a Belleville photographer, but I think he also had some shops maybe in Oregon.
Okay, because if you look really close, the background is very similar to.
Yeah, the guy sitting in the same chair and the fancy work next to him was.
They basically said at the Historical Society in Oregon, they basically said
A lot of those
he stayed,
studio pictures I'm talking now.
Yes. Oh yeah.
but they were saying that he stayed for 1 year and then he went to Watertown.
Yeah, but he was replaced by a couple of other guys that were, again, whose names I forget. But we had a photographer in the community for quite a while. Be it, if it wasn't Mr. Colby, it was a couple of other people.
Were they on Main Street?
Yes.
What building do you recall?
Probably Doc Donlan's old
Right, it might be on.
Yeah.
Jerry, are there none of those little, remember the little things that were made out of a dishpan? They looked like a mushroom, and they had pieces of chunked glass in them.
Yeah, that was a Francis special.
Yeah, and it was, the word for it was French, and it meant from the kitchen,
Oh, I don't.
whatever, and they were like little pieces of pottery all stuck in, but they're all gone?
They're all
They're
gone.
all-
And the last one was, see where that gentleman with the hat just walked?
Yep.
One was right there by that baby stone, and the foundation of it is still in the ground. And what they did is they took a piece of a drain tile, that reddish clay type tile, and they used that as the stem. And then they probably created a inverted bird bath type of form that they covered with cement. And they had fresh cement all over the material. And they would probably save things for a while. Every time a kid broke a dish or a plate or something, they saved the little pieces of glass and or pottery, and then they chucked them into the cement, and it became, I think I actually have a photograph of that. That's the last one I can remember.
There were little
But
flowers even formed.
Oh, yeah.
Some petals of little
They-
green pieces of
yeah, it
glass.
was,
They were pretty.
yeah, it was